Last year, we processed 147,124 returns. Fun, right? Handled wrong returns destroy your margin and your brand. We turn that logistical nightmare into an asset. Here's the exact framework we used. My name is Jasim. Eisa. I'm the CEO and founder of Voadera. Last year, we sold over 1 million units across our portfolio with an average return rate of 14.99%. At this point, returns just became part of our business, basically. And in this video, I'll walk you through how we think about Amazon customer returns end to end, not just to reduce returns, but to protect margin, brand equity at scale. And stick around to the end for the 8 tactics we are doing this year to reduce returns by 23% projected. Why are returns so dangerous? Returns aren't just a single line item. There's actually much more to them. So even if we just wanted to look at the numbers perspective, yes, there's a return. So let's say you sold an item for $44. Obviously that $44 is getting taken away from that sale. But more importantly, not everything is going to be, not all the Amazon fees associated with that are going to be refunded. So the referral fee, yes, is going to be refunded to you, but the fulfillment fee is not going to be refunded. Amazon is going to keep that, but also any associated fees you had with initial shipping. So from your warehouse to, let's say, Amazon's FC, the inbound, that's obviously not going to be reimbursed. The only thing reimbursed from the fees is just the referral fee. But even besides that, once it's returned, there's a return fee. So that's what Amazon charges basically to return the item from the customer to Amazon's warehouse. So you're paying for that. But then there's also any labor fees. There's also a removal order fee if you want to ship that back to you. So the reverse logistics side of things becomes very, very complicated with many downstream fees associated that you don't necessarily see at the initial point of it. But then the other part of customer returns also has to do with brand equity. Usually a return has to do, not always, again, I'm going to get more into this later, but with a negative customer experience. And you want to make sure you're protecting your brand equity. So it's very important to oversee brand returns. Why are they coming in? All that kind of stuff, rather than just looking at a single P&L line item and not seeing all the associated fees that come with that. How we look at customer returns. Customer returns in and of themselves is not an issue. Rather, we look at the underlying signal the return is telling us. And it usually falls into 4 buckets. The first one is expectation misalignment. So the customer received something that they did not expect. And this is usually 2 sides. Either the PDP portrayed something the product doesn't have, or there was an unspoken expectation based on the category. So one simple explanation of the unspoken expectation is we're working with a brand that had a foot massager, and they haven't updated the PDP or the product in actually many years. But lately, what the foot massagers are now having is a remote basically that turns it on. All the other competitors had a remote. So a lot of customers, they were leading in that category, assumed that this one also had a remote because everyone else in the market started including remotes. So although we didn't have anything in the PDP for it, the customers didn't get it. So what we did, and that's where we have to make sure we are uploading it, we specifically outlined no remote in the title, right? So that way, and then in the meantime, we updated the product to start including a remote. And it took a month, but we obviously wanted to improve return rates immediately, and we wanted to align the expectations. So that's where aligning expectations, you either update the PDP to reflect the product itself, even if it's an unspoken expectation, again, as I mentioned earlier, or you update the product to match that expectation. The second one is very simple. It's product issues. You had products that came in, they didn't do quality control, or let's say you tried a new factory, they're using, for example, one example is they were using recycled plastic instead of the other plastic that the other factory was using. So you don't have a great spec sheet. So now the products are less quality. That's a product issue. The third one is customer journey friction. This one has to do with, for example, getting it a little bit too late, running into issues with Amazon, not liking the journey that they went through. And the fourth one, and this is one that's very overlooked, is the customer or category behavior. And this is very important because some categories, there's just no way around it. For example, the return rate you mentioned at the beginning is actually fairly high. But when you look at certain categories, for example, dress shoes or Halloween items, a lot of customers, unfortunately, customer behavior, they wear it for that event and they return it. Or if it's an expensive item, right? They try it out and they are more picky with the standards. If it's a commodity, if you're selling a spoon, that's a category that has less. Some categories returns aren't even allowed. We're looking at some beauty products, supplements. So understanding that signal there of your category, what the return rate is saying about your category, because the more subjective a category is, usually the higher returns. Like let's say a color red, it's a little bit lighter red than I was expecting, right? There's subjectiveness to that. Or even sizes, right? Shoes, that's why there's a lot of returns in that, or clothing. So understanding the signal that it's telling you about the category. So usually we derive a few principles from this. Not obviously, returns aren't a blanket statement. It's not good returns, bad returns. You look at the industry, you look at the category, you measure it accordingly. Returns in themselves is not a bad thing. And not all returns are created equal. I'm gonna get more into root cause analysis and return prevention, understanding the signals behind returns in a later section, but I did want to overlay this right now. What we see many brands get wrong. I see a big issue a lot of brands doing is overly focusing on just the return rate and reducing that. So we have a 12% return rate, we want to get 10%. And incentivizing their team to do so. So what happens is the team starts creating fiction around returns. We all know the experience when you want to cancel subscription and they kind of put it behind 20 walls and surveys and everything. How do you feel when you cancel a subscription? How do you feel about that company? You feel like crap. You probably never want to see them again. You're going to talk bad about them because that was your leaving or your final touch point with that brand. It's the most memorable. So let's say someone did decide to leave you. It is what it is. It happens. How do you want their final experience to be? Do you want it to be pleasant? Because they're going to remember that the most. And they're going to tell people about that the most. Also, you risk getting negative customer reviews, which are very, very costly. Another thing to understand about just optimizing return rate, sometimes you want to eat a return rate to be classified into something. So, for example, we had a product that we made for pet food, and we made one that lasts a little bit less. So let's say that main item, it was $40, it lasts 15 hours. It's a chewing for pets, dogs chew on it basically, without giving away the specific product. But we made a budget-friendly version, and this one lasted, I think the initial one was like 12 hours or whatever. This one was more like 4 hours. It cost us 1/3 the price. We priced it for half. So that one is 40, this one is 20, but it cost us much less. So initially, we got some reviews because of the misaligned expectations, and the return rate was higher on this one. But that's fine. We were allowing a higher return rate because we were making more margin on this, and our absolute profit was higher. So sometimes a higher return rate is acceptable as long as the absolute profit, maybe the relevant profit, yes, we're making less per unit, but overall between both products, now we have a bigger demographic that can purchase a $20 one, but is not purchasing the $40 one. That might leave us a few more customer reviews, but overall, we're making more margin on the entire brand. And still, it's not a negative brand experience because also the expectations are lower on a lower price point. So overall, it wasn't hurting the brand image, and we decided to continue with it despite the return rate being higher, almost 20% higher than the higher priced one. And we usually see brands doing one of these three mistakes. One, they either dread returns and they just negative experience, nothing to learn from this, is just always bad, and they don't take the learning lessons. Two, they ignore them. They kind of, what you can't see, it's not happening, it's not going on. And the third one is that they just blindly chase a lower return rate percentage without understanding the ramification, consequences that we mentioned earlier. Before we jump in how to minimize losses for returns and make the most margin out of them, I want to explain the Amazon customer return journey and the classifications. So there's Amazon's basic classification. They call it fulfillable, unfulfillable. So customer returns something, the employee, they have 3 seconds basically. They're going to classify as either sells again, it doesn't sell again. This has two issues. One, they usually over exaggerate what's unfulfillable, and sometimes they misclassify what is fulfillable. There was a diaper brand, for example, that they classified used diaper as fulfillable, and they ran into a huge issue. So relying on Amazon's classification, you have to understand your product. You can opt out of it. You can make everything unfulfillable, by the way. But again, if you're selling just a commodity, let's say you're selling, I mean, what's a good example here? A pen, right? If you're selling pens and the returns, they classify them as fulfillable, what's the biggest case? They get something without ink. But again, if you're selling something more sensitive, like we mentioned earlier with the diapers or something that's used, you have to be much more careful. So that's understanding Amazon's classification. But even past that, the unfulfillable, Amazon's very lenient to classify unfulfillable. We found that 80%, not 80, let's say 70% of the returns that Amazon classifies as fulfillable, we can still sell them. So what we do is we usually get back a lot of the returns and we classify them in tiers. Grade A, we can sell it back on all the primary marketplaces. Grade B, this can go on eBay, etc. Grade C, this has to go on a liquidation site. So B stock or whatever. And grade D, this is just donate, garbage, return, wherever, declassify. So that's where our team is going through them. They're trying to revamp the products, they're trying to reorganize them, but understanding that classification and having where each item lives is very important. And we're very picky because we also want to protect our brand equity, because we don't want to resell something again that can't be resold and the customer gets a bad image of us. You can also sell them used on Amazon. There's used like new, used very good, used good, and we have done that with certain categories. But just understanding the classification, the difference between your internal classification and Amazon's classification, and the importance of having that difference. How to recover funds with Amazon returns. The first one is fighting non-compliant returns. Sadly, there's many scammers on Amazon. Obviously, it's not like as a percentage, it's still very small, but as an amount, it's still very high. So that bait and switch, they order something and send something else back. You can ask Amazon for reimbursement with that. You have to take a picture of the item with the LPN number, with the UPC, you open a case with Amazon, and they've been fairly good with reimbursing those. So you just have to make the right evidence and you have to submit it to Amazon. So make sure all non-compliant, that's bait and switch is one example. There's other examples, there's a whole list of non-compliant returns. There's TOS, Amazon's Terms of Service, where you can return. And if a customer violates the Terms of Service, you wanna make sure you open a case to recover those funds. The second thing is using Amazon's liquidation or grade and resell programs. So the liquidation program, it's somewhat useful for products that have a low cost of goods and a low and very heavy, because you're not paying for Amazon to return this product back to you, which is usually you're going to pay your removal order fee for that. In fact, Amazon sells it. The issue is they're usually going to give you, I mean, it's tough to give a rule of thumb, but 10 to 20% of retail. So it sucks, but sometimes relevant. We have a very heavy item. The cost of goods on it was very low. So actually it was better as a cost analysis to get the liquidation, simple math, we get the funds from there. So look at it for your item, look how much you're getting on average selling it on maybe used marketplaces, or how much you can recover versus what Amazon's giving you. The other one is grade and resell. So this is where, again, Amazon customer, similar to fulfillable and unfulfillable, now they're looking at it and seeing if it classifies for used very good, used like new. So they're also classifying it for you, and sometimes it's good. Again, depends on the product, the sensitivity associated with that, but they're useful Amazon program. They released them just maybe 2 or 3 years ago, maybe grade and resell is more recent, but take a look. They might work for your brand, your product, all that kind of stuff. Now let's get into the most important part that's very overlooked, which is preventing the returns or reducing them in the first place. And this has the 8 tactics that we're using this year. The first one is a product support option. So some products that are more technical, customers are returning them. This is, again, going back to customer journey, friction, they have issues using them. We have a support option, chat, phone number, whatever. Amazon's now allowing this. So we're supporting them before they return. We're asking that they ask for support. So more technical products, we use this. More expensive products, we use this. If it's cheap, it's not worth hiring someone, but it's also not worth giving the customer a headache. Again, going back to the customer journey to return something. The second one is a partial refund. So sometimes we see someone had a bad experience. We let them keep the item that's still acceptable, but they don't keep it. Maybe we just ask for 50% refund. So we're training our customer service reps to do that, and it's helping us reduce returns. The third one is quality control before shipping. So now we have audits before shipping goes into Amazon. We have a sourcing agent, either by our factories, that's in China, we have some in the US, or sometimes we use third-party companies to check randomly 8 products. We can walk in at any time to the factory, make sure everything's good, because again, one bad lot or one bad shipment can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on how big that order was. And not only that, but it can cost you long-term with negative reviews, all that kind of stuff. The fourth one is a clear product spec sheet. So this is an important one. Changing factories, we have to write exactly what raw materials are used. So yes, another factory might give us a cheaper price, but as I mentioned earlier, they're using recycled plastic instead of original plastic. So that's where you could have an issue with that. The fifth one is FBMing more expensive products. So let's say we have certain jewelry, we have certain products that are sensitive or technology. We purposely FBM that because we have more flexibility and more control over the return process, or stuff that has a higher return rate. We try to understand, because then we can have more flexibility, more talking with the customer. We obviously don't want to make it a bad experience. We want to understand what's going on. We want to talk to the customer before they return it. So we have more flexibility with that. The sixth, and this is the most important one, it addresses it from the root cause, but it's aligning expectations. We mentioned this earlier. We're doing now AI customer analysis for customer reviews, understanding what's going on wrong, understanding the messaging, what's going on wrong, what's frequently returned reason. Is it something that's missing in the PDP, product detail page, that they're not seeing in the item, or is it something in the item that we have to update that is available in the product detail page? One example is we had a item, so this is just a simple example. We had it as a neck ice wrap basically. But when the product came in, the manual was for the upper back. The product worked for both, but sometimes customers, they just want look through things quickly. Again, going back to customer journey friction. So we updated the PDP and we updated the manual to make sure it notates both, and that reduced returns. I have a video attached at the end of improving customer returns. I went through that all. And obviously, if you improve customer returns, by default, you're going to improve reviews because your product is better, the product journey is better. So I'll attach that at the end, and you can go through it, but the biggest thing is aligning expectations, reading rigorously through your reviews, even the Vine reviews. Those are people that take time to write it. I know everyone hates them, but they actually provide good insights, and we've been able to benefit them. Like one example is on a crib mattress that we're selling, it was only 2 inches. We have to advertise as a topper rather than a mattress because it's not enough to hold that. And we talked to the brand about that, and our return rate was greatly reduced based on the forecast of the reviews that we're getting. So again, aligning expectations is very important. Changing category to one that won't allow returns. This is a sneaky one, but it's actually worked good. So sometimes categories fall into 2 different ones, and specifically if you can nudge it to one, customers just can't return it. Sometimes customers are overly picky, especially on Amazon, they expect the best. So we have been able to successfully change the category when it's kind of double dipping to one that won't allow returns. There's certain categories that won't allow. You can research this online. So if you see if your product is on the edge, and see if you can nudge it and change the category node to that one instead. And then the 8th one is starting all the way from product development and manufacturing, product entering, to enter products that have less of a return rate and factoring that into the unit economics. And we've been doing that a lot. We've been shifting it to categories with less, whether that's, or developing the product from day one to a customer segment that's less picky or less likely to return products. So now, for example, if we are doing Halloween products, we have to factor in that there's a higher return rate, or event-related products, the higher return rate. So now when we're doing the production, we factor in that return rate. Let's say we're expecting a 13% loss. So we factor in, just like we're factoring tacos of 10 to 20%, we're factoring it in, and we're seeing if we still have the desired contribution margin at the end. All in all, returns aren't something you fight or ignore. You manage them strategically with intent, and you want to try fixing them, the causes from the root source.